Do you ever wonder why your vocal recording sounds flat and thin and it doesn't have that punch that a professional podcaster or hip hop artist or TV news anchor, why their voice sounds so much better than yours? It's not your voice. It's because you don't know how to use compression. So we're going to look at different tools and how they can get you that nice, polished, rich vocal sound that pops out, gets you head and shoulders above the competition. So let's jump right into how to use compression to make a voice pop. Now, this recording in Pro Tools is my voice. I apologize for that. You're going to be hearing my voice for this whole video, but I don't have to pay anybody for the rights to use it, and it's not AI, so we're going to roll with it. This recording has a huge dynamic range. Let's just listen to it.
We're going to try to go from a whisper, like a true whisper, to a little bit more of a hoarse whisper, to maybe like a stage whisper, to now I'm going to start growl talking like a valley girl. Now I'm going to start talking a little more normally. And this is kind of how I normally talk, but then when you start talking about V8 engines and guns, I get really excited, and then I kind of just fade back to whisper again. Hopefully the compressor will be able to catch all this stuff from super loud to super quiet, and also, you know, the normal in between.
Okay, so that recording was all over the place. That crazy maniac went from a true whisper to a true yell in one recording. Not good, super hard to deal with. I could deal with it with volume automation, or I could ask them to shut up and not be so loud, but we're gonna use compression to solve this problem. So let's just back up a little bit and talk about what a compressor really does. Actually, better yet, I'll show you. Let's drag this audio file to another track, and let's just make it yellow. And we're going to use a compressor. Let's just use the stock Pro Tools compressor, why not? Everybody who has Pro Tools has this guy in their machine. So there's presets, which is really nice. It actually has a vocal compressor, and we're just going to render that bad boy, and we will be able to see the difference here. All a compressor does is take the loudest parts of the signal and squeeze them down. It turns down the volume on them. Then it uses a control called makeup gain to bring up the resulting signal, because really a compressor is making things quieter. It's taking the loudest parts and making them quieter. So with the compressor, you have a makeup gain control that compensates for you turning it down by turning it back up. And that's important because if you're turning everything down, that's kind of the opposite usually of what you want to do.
Louder is better.
So we've used the stock compressor limiter here, and all compressors, well, most compressors have the same type of controls, and we're going to go through what each of these controls does. Let's just start with the threshold. This is the most important control in a compressor. The threshold tells the compressor when to start compressing. So I have it set to -30 right now. That's just what was in the preset. That means after the signal goes over -30, the compressor is going to start to compress. How much is it going to compress? The ratio. The ratio determines how much squish the compressor applies. So this is very gentle, 1.8 to 1 ratio. It's really not doing too much. So the other two controls that we need to adjust on a compressor are the attack and the release. The attack is how quickly, after the signal goes over the threshold, how quickly does the compressor start to compress by the ratio. So I have it set to 1.2 milliseconds. You can slide it down to microseconds. You can go up to 300 milliseconds on here. Different compressors will have different ranges. The release is how slowly or quickly the compressor lets go of this signal. So in other words, the speed that the compressor stops compressing. So once the audio goes below the threshold, the compressor is going to say, I'm done. I'm not going to touch the signal anymore. And the release is how quickly that happens. What you don't want is you don't want the compressor to just bam, let go as soon as the audio goes below the threshold, because you're going to get a pop if that happens. So the release, you want to set to where it's basically transparent. You can't hear the compressor stop compressing. The attack is a little trickier to get because if you compress too fast, you'll lose all the attack on a vocal recording. And in a lot of languages, that attack is very important. German, Spanish, Portuguese, some of the Slavic languages, even English to a certain extent, the consonants will get smushed over if your attack is too fast. So be very cautious about how fast you make the attack. Generally, what I've found is that 5 to 10 milliseconds on the attack is really good for vocals, and the release anywhere from 100 to 200 milliseconds is perfect. It's nice and transparent. You have some other controls here like the knee. The knee determines, it's kind of like a gentle threshold, a threshold smooth, if you will, where it starts to compress before the audio gets over the threshold, but at a lower ratio. And you can go with zero knee, which is basically just what you see here, which is that as soon as the threshold is crossed, it's easier to see with the higher ratio. As soon as the threshold is crossed, the compressor starts acting. So that's with this compressor. That's just a preset. Let's go ahead and check out some other compressors, including one that actually I made to make compression super easy for anybody to do. So we did kind of the stock Pro Tools compressor, which is fine, but it's not really special. So let's check out the FabFilter Pro C, and we'll throw on one of their presets. We've got vocals. Let's go spoken word squeeze, and we're going to render this. Now, oftentimes you will use a compressor as an insert on your track, meaning right here, dynamics compressor. But we're doing this. I want you to actually see the change in the waveform from the raw to, we'll just call this the Avid. This is the Fab. So here is the output from the FabFilter. You can see it's kind of done the same thing. The whispered section is brought up a lot more in this one, probably because there's more makeup gain applied. And the nice thing about the FabFilter Pro C2 is it's very transparent, but it's also very expensive. So same deal. It's the same type of controls on there. Now for the real kind of wild card test, we're going to do the auto comp. And this is something where I had basically no work for a month. And I thought, what am I going to do at this time? I could go fishing. I could go, spend time working on the house. I could try to find a temporary job. And I said, no, screw that. I'm going to learn how to make a plugin. I actually made 2 plugins. One of them is a channel strip. This is the one I'm more proud of. This is auto comp. And you can pick this up on my website if you're interested, but it's really cool because this totally simplifies compression. There's a couple other compressors that make compressing things very easy, but auto comp is just, to me, it's probably because I made it. It's like you're proud of your own kids in school. It's head and shoulders above the rest because it's super simple. There's 4 controls. You have a lift control, compression amount, a trim, and a safety limiter, which you can turn off. This lift control was super important to me because the problem with most compressors is that sounds below the threshold, like whispers or, if somebody's just a little down on their volume, they don't get compressed at all. But if you lower the threshold to compress those sounds, then the stuff that's loud or normal volume gets way too compressed. So this lift control boosts the low volume signals up to the compression threshold so that pretty much everything hitting this is a little bit compressed. When it's on, it's going to lift those low signals, and if it's off, it's not going to touch them. The next control is comp. It's just a big compression knob. It's a multi-faceted control, but it's super simple. It's one knob that controls a bunch of different features, including automatic makeup gain, the ratio, and the knee. So it's all going to be done automatically under the hood, and you really just have to slide up the control up or down. The trim is kind of like an output gain. For YouTube videos, for example, you're actually listening to me through auto comp right now. For YouTube videos, I boost that trim up quite a bit because the loudness standards for YouTube is -14. So I want to hit that when I'm streaming or if I'm doing a recorded video. I don't want to have to touch things in post-production. So I just use auto comp and it brings everything right into the pocket. But let's test this out on the signal. I'm just going to leave it where it's at right now. The default settings of 50% compression, no trim, lift on and limiter on. We're going to render it and we're going to see what this does. It does take a little bit longer because of all the stuff that's going on under the hood. But you can see here what this has done is more so than any of the other plugins. It's actually brought up the whispers quite a bit. And we're actually going to go one step further. We're going to crank this bad boy all the way up to 100% and see how even we can get this. So this is auto comp at 100%. And you can see compared to the other compressors here, here's the raw Here's the Avid compressor. Here's the Pro C2, and here's the auto comp. The auto compressor has brought up the whispers all the way almost to the same level as the loudness, and we're going to listen and see what that sounds like. Let's listen to each of these in order. Here's the stock compressor.
I'm gonna try to go from a whisper, like a true whisper, to a little bit more of a hoarse whisper, to maybe like a stage whisper, to now I'm gonna start growl talking like a valley girl. Now I'm gonna start talking a little more normally. And this is kind of how I normally talk, but then when you start talking about V8 engines and guns, I get really excited, and then I kind of just fade back to whisper again.
Pretty transparent, maybe a little rubbery sounding, but that's kind of how that compressor sounds. This next one is the FabFilter Pro C2 with the default setting.
I'm gonna try to go from a whisper, like a true whisper, to a little bit more of a hoarse whisper, to maybe like a stage whisper, to now I'm gonna start growl talking like a valley girl. Now I'm gonna start talking a little more normally. And this is kind of how I normally talk, but then when you start talking about V8 engines and guns, I get really excited, and then I kind of just fade back to whisper again.
Cool, that sounds great. Here's the auto comp.
We're gonna try to go from a whisper, like a true whisper, to a little bit more of a hoarse whisper, to maybe like a stage whisper, to now I'm gonna start growl talking like a valley girl. Now I'm gonna start talking a little more normally. And this is kind of how I normally talk, but then when you start talking about V8 engines and guns, I get really excited, and then I kind of just fade back to whisper again. Hopefully the compressor will be able to catch all this stuff from super loud to super quiet. And also, you know, the normal in-between sound as well.
So now that you've heard some examples of what different compressors will do to your voice, let's talk about how you would adjust a compressor to suit the material that you are working on. Let's just bring up, we haven't checked out the Pro compressor yet, so let's look at that. Let's load this up as an insert. I'm going to turn off auto comp. You're going to hear a pretty big change there. And we're actually going to put this on what you're listening to right now. We'll do it live. In a compressor, the first thing you need to do is adjust the threshold. This is a great plugin for visualizing where the signal is and where it ends up as it's compressed, because you have an input, an output, and you have a live meter here. No matter what type of compression you're using, the first thing you want to do is lower the threshold to where the curve of the threshold is happening right at kind of the peaks of the audio. So you'll be able to hear as I adjust this what it's doing to my voice. So if I go too low on the threshold, you get too much compression. And if you go too high on the threshold, you get no compression. You want to have it right in the sweet spot where the break point of the threshold is right at the peak of the vocal signal, whether it's yours or somebody else's. So that's the first thing, get the threshold right. The next thing we're going to do is adjust the ratio. If I take the ratio all the way down, again, no compression. If I go all the way up, it's basically a limiter and it starts to slam that signal. So for vocals, I like to go anywhere from like 2 to 5. I mean, for hip hop vocals, you might end up pretty high, like around 8 or 10. But like 2 to 4 is like a really good sweet spot. Kind of the rule of thumb that I learned, which is one that's meant to be broken, is the amount of reduction, the gain reduction here. 3 to 6 dB of reduction is really nice. It's a nice sweet spot. But, you know, for aggressive stuff, you might need to be louder. And honestly, just trust your ears on this. So the knee, we're going to adjust. This is going to give you a nice ramp into the compression. The attack is fine at 5 milliseconds. Release, I'm going to bring up to about 150 or so. Depth, this control, just maybe don't worry about it for now. This limits how much the compression is applied. So if you only want 6 dB of compression and no more, you can set that to -6. Just leave it off and it'll compress as much as it needs to suit these controls. Now you can adjust the mix on many compressors. This will blend in some of the dry signal. This can be great if you have a really dynamic signal where there's a lot of yelling and a lot of whispering. It lets a little more of the original dynamics bleed through and be a little more natural. But, you know, just to hear what the compressor is doing, leave that at 100% wet. And then makeup gain. I talked about this a little bit. As a compressor turns things down, you can see the input is about -6 and the output is -10. I think, yeah, that'll tell you where stuff's at. We need to bring this signal up so that we're not only compensating for the reduction that's happening, but also you can use this control to get your audio closer to a spec level, you know, the loudness spec, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, whatever. You use the makeup gain to kind of pocket the dialogue or vocals into the loudness level that you need to hit. So you might end up using quite a bit of makeup gain, and the more compression you do, the more gain reduction you're seeing, the more makeup gain you'll need to use in order to compensate for that reduction. I've switched back to my auto comp because I know it's going to do a great job of leveling things out. I want to quickly give you 5 common mistakes that I see people make with compressors. The very first one is too much compression. The threshold is too low, the ratio is too high, stuff is overly compressed. You can hear every breath, every mouse fart in the room. No dynamics at all. Don't do that. The second mistake is not enough compression. No compression at all in a lot of content that goes out. The problem with that is when things get too low or too loud, it's either going to hurt people's ears or they're not going to be able to pick it up. The third mistake I see people do with compression is use too fast of an attack, and you start to lose the percussiveness of the native language. That's also bad. You want more clarity, not less. The fourth mistake I see people make is not enough makeup gain. It's compressed, it's quieter, you have to add more sauce to the recording in order for it to pop out. And then the fifth mistake I see people make is that all the tracks are compressed. The music is compressed, the dialogue, the sound effects. Compress the dialogue most of all and leave the other elements, especially the music and the sound effects, more dynamic so that the dialogue has room to cut through. If everything is compressed, it's going to sound really messy. Your ears are going to get tired listening to it, and it's not going to be a good sounding mix. So use it with caution. I think I'm going to wrap this video up. Thank you guys so much for watching this. If this has helped you, leave a comment. If you have any questions about compression, definitely also leave a comment. Feel free to ask. I try to answer as many questions as I can. And if you're interested in picking up Auto Compressor, it's on my website. It's $50. Every penny spent there helps support this channel and gives me more time to make more content. So thank you guys for checking this out. I'll see you next time.